Hello Internet, and welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the Abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today we will be talking about B.S. Johnson's novel The Unfortunates, which comes in a box and has 27 sections temporarily held together by a removable wrapper, as is explained inside the box. Apart from the first and last sections, which are marked as such, the other 25 sections are intended to be read in random order. This novel was released in 1969 and is perhaps B.S. Johnson's most famous book, though all his books were experiments in form, kind of attempts to redefine the novel each time. As I often do on this channel, I'm going to give a sort of introduction to Johnson that's going to be very subjective. I sort of view this channel as like a kind of zine, so my introductions are always very subjective and about my relationship to the thing I'm talking about. If you know a lot about B.S. Johnson already, you don't really want to hear this bit, you're just interested to hear somebody talk about their opinion of the novel, I'm going to put in, a chapter heading, so hop over to that bit. Otherwise, let's talk about how I came to know of B.S. Johnson. So when I was a teenager, I read an interview with Tom York from the band Radiohead where he said that he had been reading a novel called What a Carve Up by the novelist Jonathan Coe, and that this novel had influenced some of the lines in the text of the track on OK Computer, Fitter Happier, specifically A Pig in a Cage on Antibiotics, because this book was partly about farming and I was newly vegetarian at the time, so I was interested in this and I read What a Carve Up, and it was very politically formative for me, and it was also quite an eye-opener in terms of how you could structure a book experimentally. It was one of the first very postmodern books that I read also, where it was very clearly unreliable narration, and the book was kind of put together from letters and newspaper articles and someone's attempt to write a biography of a family. Really a great book. So Jonathan Coe became my favourite writer for a couple of years. He subsequently published a book called The House of Sleep that I found very moving when I read it, and The Rotters Club, which became very successful and really blew him up as an author. Later on, I kind of lost interest in his books, but before that happened, he wrote a biography of B.S. Johnson called Like a Fiery Elephant, and he released this in 2004. I bought it when it came out in hardback, and I didn't know who B.S. Johnson was. I just admired Jonathan Coe and was interested in any writer that he was interested in. There's an argument to be made that this is Jonathan Coe's best book. So if you're interested in any of this stuff and you haven't read this book, maybe you think by the end of this video that the novel I'm talking about sounds interesting, I would definitely recommend this. The one thing about it is that it describes Johnson's process and his innovations in his novels in some detail. So one of the things that has happened for me is that when I've read his books, they don't surprise me in the way that maybe they would if I came to them fresh. On the other hand, it's a really, really moving and interesting account of a kind of fish out of water. He was a working class guy, had a bachelor's in literature, was a modernist, fiercely interested in Joyce, in Beckett, in architecture, but also in the trade union movement, very left wing, and struggled to find his place in an English cultural environment that was staunchly middle class and also quite conservative in terms of his attitude to literature. There haven't been many very experimental novelists in the UK. Jonathan Coe, who incorporated some of Johnson's experimentalism, was much more a kind of recognisable comic novelist when compared to somebody like Johnson, who maybe would have been more successful had he been working on the continent. At least that's what people often say about him. So of Johnson's major novels, the only one I haven't read is Travelling People, which was his first novel. That one is apparently very indebted to Joyce. His second novel, I believe it is, let me just check. Albert Angelo, yeah. That one means quite a lot to me because it's about somebody working as a teacher who wants to be an architect, but it's actually about B.S. Johnson working as a teacher when he wants to be a writer. And towards the end of the book, he breaks the fourth wall and starts to become quite aggressive about how he's disguising his life through fiction. And he says, fuck all this lying. And he starts talking about how, this is actually about him and how he wants to be a writer. And he's incorporated bits of things that children in his class have written and so on. And there's also a famously like a hole cut through the page in this book, and some typographical innovations where he's writing on different parts of the page. This one is really good, and actually this is first editions, one of the only first editions that I have. I really like this book. I haven't actually enjoyed a lot of his other novels apart from Albert Angelo when I've read them. He wrote a book called Trawl, which the idea was that he went on a trawler and he at the same time tried to trawl through his subconscious, and he writes in this kind of paragraph down the center of the page a sort of stream of consciousness, influenced by Beckett, I think, a great deal. The issue with Johnson, though, maybe is that his interior world is quite bleak, quite sad, and not especially arresting. And so that book I kind of just thought was decent. His book, House Mother Normal, which is the one that comes after The Unfortunates, I really found quite unpleasant and depressing in a way that really kind of upset me. I actually could have put it on my list of disturbing books when I did that. I'll link in the description to a more in-depth piece of writing that I did about that book in case you're interested to read it. And then Christy Mallory's own double entry that was adapted to a pretty terrible film in the early 2000s. That one's decent, but it's like a lot of Johnson's stuff, it's almost like he's bored of what he's trying to attempt. Like the idea is more important for him than the writing. This book, however, I think is probably his best. I like Albert Angelo a lot, but this one I think is where he really nailed it in terms of the content and the form really matching each other in a fascinating way. So let's talk about The Unfortunates. Johnson starts the book with this first chapter, the one that just says first. And in this chapter, the central character, which is B.S. Johnson, absolutely no attempt to disguise it, comes to Nottingham where he's supposed to cover a football match as a journalist. He's trying to make some extra money writing about football. And in fact, in this edition, which is the reprint, they've put his football article, printed it inside the box. When he gets to Nottingham, he realizes that this is where he originally met his good friend Tony, who helped him write his first book and was a bit of an inspiration to him politically and artistically. Tony was more of an academic, but they shared a lot of interests, and Johnson seems to have a real love for him. But Tony sadly died of cancer in his 20s, and Johnson had to kind of experience this loss, and the memories come back to him through the course of the day while he is in Nottingham. And that is why the chapters of the book can be shuffled in any order. One really cool thing is that they thought that maybe they wouldn't always be able to print it in a box. So what they did is they printed a unique symbol on each chapter so that if they ever did a hardback edition that was bound, they would include a page with all of these symbols and you could cut them up and shuffle them and draw them out at random. And the idea here is that the mind is not linear, memory is not linear, time as we experience it is not linear, it's associative. So the chapters are to read in any order because that is how he experiences the day, that's how he experiences his life, looking back on it. Associations, memories of Tony, and it flits between one might be like a one-page memory of Tony. So for example, this one is just a single paragraph on a single sheet of paper describing the moment Johnson learns that Tony has died. Others are accounts of him going to the pub, eating lunch, going to cover the football, and then maybe thoughts of Tony flit through his mind, but maybe it's just moments from the day. And slowly you get the story of their relationship and both of them getting married and Johnson going to visit Tony when he was sick, and then Tony's death and how it has hurt him and how he struggles to process it. Some anger, some loss, and some beautiful writing. I wanted to read a little section of this towards the end where he's talking about how he tried to record their final conversations. His fingers tampering with the mic, and he kept switching it off. Perhaps it was too much for him. The thought, I won't be here. Perhaps he had this thought inside him insistently by now. All hope gone, saying, I won't be here to see this, or that, or whatever. Even to see this article that we're talking about. Perhaps I was too ghoulish in wanting to have his voice, the reason I had brought the recorder. Though I did genuinely want his help with the article too. Ghoulish, but not now, no. I have the man's voice still. The shake in it that was not there before, the sippings, the pauses, long sighs. I remember so clearly, have played it enough times, his voice, or the last vestiges of it. It's not that clear. A new slur too, but his voice I still have, yes, and what he said, what he was. When he writes like that, it is very beautiful. When he's really on fire like that, it's quite like Joyce, or you can see the influence of Beckett, but it's also very down to earth and very moving. And Johnson was doing something that's quite ahead of his time. You know, later on, people have written a lot of fictional memoirs that are very self-exposing, very confessional. Knausgård, the Norwegian writer, caused enormous scandals for being very open about his own internal world and his family and the goings on in his life. And Johnson is doing that in this book many years before, at the same time as he's playing around with, can I create a book which you can genuinely read in any order and it will still fall together? And I think unbelievably, he kind of does pull it off. He's not afraid to be unsympathetic. He's going around complaining about architecture and decoration all the time, staunchly anti-Christian, quite depressive, obviously, like dislikes his own body, and very hung up on this girl Wendy that he was seeing at the time, who seems to be a kind of lost love interest. I will say that the stuff about Wendy is the least interesting part of the book, and I sort of wish Johnson had left it out. In one way, you could say that it's him just trying to demonstrate, the inside of his mind on a given day. But let's be honest, he left out loads of things. There's no moments in this where he's going to the bathroom. There are no completely irrelevant thoughts either. He's taken everything that he can use to kind of build a portrait of the time he's remembering. He didn't have to have quite as much stuff complaining about his broken heart over Wendy, which by the time the book was written was not even really relevant anymore since he was married to somebody else. That's a small gripe, though, about a very interesting, brave, creative novel, which should probably be mentioned more often when people talk about great British novels. It's experimental not just in this form, but also within the given chapters. He's often trying different things and playing with language. There's one part where he's just giving the way that he delivers his newspaper article over the phone with the punctuation and everything as if it's a telegram, and then sort of presenting that as him as like a working writer, but also as a sort of form of concrete poetry almost. There are also some quotes on the inside of the box, and one of those is, "I have often thought that there has rarely passed a life of which a judicious and faithful narrative would not be useful." And Johnson is definitely applying this both to the life of Tony, who he's tried to memorialize in this work, but also his own life. And sadly, he died young. He took his own life, and this novel, as kind of a reflection around life and death, takes on an even greater sense of melancholy when you know this about him. So that's my discussion of B.S. Johnson's The Unfortunates, my thoughts about the novel. I think the title refers to both him and Tony, but maybe actually to all of us, because it is partly a book about the human condition, about mortality, about loss, about friendship and sadness. If you have read the book, I would love to hear from you about it. If you would just like to comment on this video and the thoughts that it brought up for you, I would also love to hear from you. And otherwise, I hope to see you again another time. Take care for now.